She was once the palace's problem, and later its most forgiving survivor. For decades, Sarah Ferguson has occupied a peculiar place within the royal constellation. Too bright to disappear, too flawed to truly belong. Her laughter once filled Buckingham's corridors. Now, it lingers faintly, as if echoing through memory rather than invitation. Once hailed as the breath of fresh air the monarchy needed, she soon became the gust it tried to shut out. Yet somehow she endured, not through silence or contrition, but through a stubborn kind of kindness. The same warmth that once embarrassed the establishment later became her quiet rebellion against it. Today, those who know her speak of a woman both softened and worn, one who keeps smiling because the alternative feels too much like surrender. Her life has become a long act of composure, performed for a world that never forgot her first fall. The palace may have forgiven her, but it never truly forgot. And so, Fergie lives in a rare kind of captivity, not behind gates, but within expectation. She writes, she appears, she encourages others to heal, while her own healing remains politely deferred. Because in royal life, redemption is not freedom. It is endurance wrapped in grace, a test without an end date. As the camera lingers on the soft morning light spilling through Windsor curtains, a single teacup trembles on its saucer. The voice that follows is calm, curious, and faintly sad, asking the question Britain has long avoided. What does it cost a woman to remain forgiven? She was once the palace's problem, and later its most forgiving survivor. For decades, Sarah Ferguson has occupied a peculiar place within the royal constellation. Too bright to disappear, too flawed to truly belong. Her laughter once filled Buckingham's corridors. Now, it lingers faintly, as if echoing through memory rather than invitation. Once hailed as the breath of fresh air the monarchy needed, she soon became the gust it tried to shut out. Yet somehow she endured, not through silence or contrition, but through a stubborn kind of kindness. The same warmth that once embarrassed the establishment later became her quiet rebellion against it. Today, those who know her speak of a woman both softened and worn, one who keeps smiling because the alternative feels too much like surrender. Her life has become a long act of composure, performed for a world that never forgot her first fall. The palace may have forgiven her, but it never truly forgot. And so, Fergie lives in a rare kind of captivity, not behind gates, but within expectation. She writes, she appears, she encourages others to heal, while her own healing remains politely deferred. Because in royal life, redemption is not freedom. It is endurance wrapped in grace, a test without an end date. As the camera lingers on the soft morning light spilling through Windsor curtains, a single teacup trembles on its saucer. The voice that follows is calm, curious, and faintly sad, asking the question Britain has long avoided. What does it cost a woman to remain forgiven? Every resurrection has its price. For Sarah Ferguson, survival became a performance, one that demanded more than applause. The stage was never dismantled. It simply shifted from palace corridors to private rooms, from press conferences to polite dinners behind closed gates. She smiled through creditors, controversies, and whispered judgments, each grin concealing another compromise. Her partnership with Prince Andrew, part affection, part allegiance, defied royal logic and public expectation. They lived together at Royal Lodge long after divorce had supposedly divided them, a shared sanctuary built on nostalgia and necessity. She called it loyalty, observers called it dependence. Perhaps both were right. Within those walls, she balanced gratitude with quiet desperation, the need for stability against the cost of perception. Every choice was weighed against tomorrow's headline. Every act of trust carried the risk of debt, both financial and emotional. Money, that most unroyal subject, haunted her story like a recurring motif. Reports of unpaid loans, misguided ventures, and opportunistic advisors shadowed her efforts at renewal. Each fresh start seemed to carry a quiet echo of the last mistake, proof that forgiveness, even when public, does not erase consequence. Yet through the strain, she never abandoned hope. Her interviews brimmed with optimism, her tone ever maternal, as if reassurance itself could pay the bills. She spoke often of kindness, how it heals, how it matters, how it multiplies when shared. But kindness, when stretched to survive, becomes fatigue in disguise. Friends describe late-night anxieties, letters written but never sent, the fear of disappointing those who still believe in her resilience. They speak of health battles borne privately, of energy spent mending both reputation and spirit. Even her laughter, the famous unfiltered kind, began to sound rehearsed, a melody practiced out of habit rather than joy. There is something deeply British about her endurance. Polite, stoic, uncomplaining. And yet, beneath that composure lies the ache of a woman who gave too much to remain palatable, who learned that grace, when demanded endlessly, begins to hollow. As the scene fades, a letter is opened in candlelight. The Windsor gates close softly behind her. An empty chair waits across the breakfast table. No headlines, no spectacle, only the quiet cost of being endlessly forgiving in a world that seldom forgives back. And for a moment, the viewer understands. Redemption may restore reputation, but it rarely restores peace. The headlines arrived quietly this time, not with ridicule, but with worry. No scandal, no spectacle, just unease. Whispers began to circulate. Friends, deeply concerned. Palace sources, hoping she takes time to rest. The tone, once merciless, had softened. The laughter that followed her through the 90s had been replaced by something more hesitant. Sympathy. Sarah Ferguson, once the monarchy's exuberant survivor, now appeared fragile again. Illness, financial strain, emotional fatigue. The same ghosts returning to familiar corridors. But this time, there was no villain, no camera flash of outrage. Only the weary recognition that survival itself can fracture under repetition. In the rhythm of her life, the pattern feels hauntingly circular. She rebuilds, the world forgives, and just as stability appears possible, the weight returns. The applause quiets, the debts rise, the energy wanes. It's not scandal that breaks her. It's endurance. Observers note how her optimism, once her greatest shield, now trembles under scrutiny. She speaks of gratitude, of faith, of moving forward, yet her eyes betray the fatigue of someone who's been moving forward for too many years without ever arriving. Britain has changed. Compassion has evolved. Where there was once appetite for humiliation, there's now discomfort at watching someone unravel in slow motion. And perhaps that's progress, or simply age catching up with empathy. Even within the palace, the perception has shifted. In an institution trying to modernise, her frailty now feels oddly prophetic. She embodies a truth the monarchy can no longer ignore. Endurance has limits, and emotional survival cannot be rehearsed. Behind every polished portrait of resilience lies the quiet possibility of collapse. Not dramatic, not visible, but slow, cumulative, human. The flashbulbs still flicker as she arrives at charity events, but fewer questions are shouted now. The media lens lingers, uncertain, no longer hunting, merely observing. As the camera pulls back, the soundscape fades, the murmur of reporters, the click of cameras, the sigh of a door closing. Then, silence. A Duchess sits alone under low light, perhaps at the same Windsor table where she once rehearsed gratitude. The tea grows cold. The smile doesn't quite hold. This is not a fall. Not anymore. It's the quiet collapse of someone who has been endlessly forgiven, endlessly performing, and finally allowed, by public exhaustion as much as grace, to stop pretending she's fine. Because even forgiveness, when prolonged, can become its own quiet undoing. History may never crown Sarah Ferguson a heroine, but neither can it erase her humanity. She has become something quieter, something rarer, a woman who continues when continuation itself is an act of grace. At Royal Lodge, she remains in familiar company. The same walls, the same gardens, the same companion in Prince Andrew. Their lives now run parallel, bound not by romance, but by shared history, by habit, by a sense of unfinished loyalty. It is an arrangement Britain doesn't quite understand, yet one that feels unmistakably human. Two people who once broke apart, choosing still to face the world side by side, if only out of recognition of what once was. Her daughters speak of her with tenderness. Beatrice and Eugenie, now mothers themselves, defend her quietly. Not through grand gestures, but through steadfast presence. They understand what she endured, so they could belong. Their affection is her clearest redemption. The monarchy, meanwhile, keeps its polite distance. There are gestures of civility, of inclusion, but little warmth. She attends when invited, retreats when not. Royal Lodge, for her, is both home and border, close enough to the crown to feel its chill, far enough to breathe. Yet in this liminal space, she endures. She writes. She speaks of kindness and forgiveness, with the tone of someone who has had to practice both. She supports charities with quiet diligence. Her name no longer headline material, her work unpublicised but sincere. Gone is the need to dazzle. In its place, a gentler desire to be useful, to be at peace. Observers say she no longer chases approval. Perhaps she learned that survival, not admiration, is the truer victory. Her life today is smaller, steadier, and more honest than the one she once performed. And in that shrinking, there is a kind of expansion, the freedom to exist without apology. When the camera lingers on Royal Lodge at dawn, the candlelight still burns faintly in an upstairs window. It is not a symbol of defiance, but of endurance, the steady glow of someone who has learned to live in half light and still call it home. Her survival may not be glamorous, but it is rare, because grace, once stripped of privilege, reveals its purest form: quiet persistence, the courage to remain even when the world has stopped looking. Perhaps Sarah Ferguson's story was never truly about scandal or survival. It was about hope, fragile, unfashionable, and stubborn, blooming in a house that seldom knows how to hold it. She lived for decades at the fault line between grace and gossip, learning that apology, when performed long enough, becomes both armour and art. Each chapter of her life, the laughter, the exile, the return, was an attempt to answer a single unspoken question: can forgiveness outlast curiosity? Others withdrew, rebuilt in private, and were quietly forgotten. But Fergie remained, not perfect, not polished, but present. It was, in its own way, an act of defiance, to stand in the same light that once burned her, and still find something worth smiling for. There is poetry in her persistence. She has been mocked, forgiven, dismissed, and rediscovered, yet through each transformation, she carried the same unmistakable warmth, the same refusal to vanish. In a family defined by distance, she offered something dangerously human: visibility without perfection. And perhaps that is her quiet triumph, to embody imperfection so openly that it becomes a mirror. Through her, we glimpse the monarchy's most delicate paradox. Beneath its ceremony lies a longing for ordinary grace, for the right to falter and still belong. History may never settle on what she was, saint, sinner, survivor, but maybe that uncertainty is the point. Because Fergie's story reminds us that endurance, not image, is the truer nobility. As daylight filters through Windsor's mist and a candle's flame trembles before fading, the camera pulls back from the window of Royal Lodge. The silence that follows is not pity, it is peace. She did not rewrite her legend, she simply refused to stop living it.